Hey guys, today's story is a little different. Picture this, a custom-built 5-bedroom house in the hills, fully paid off, with views stretching across the city. The driveway fits for luxury cars, all registered under my name. And inside? The sounds of laughter, clinking cutlery, and the occasional passive-aggressive jab that I used to shrug off as just family. I'm Roger Cole, 42, software architect and co-founder of a cybersecurity firm that, as of last quarter, cleared $11.2 million in annual revenue. You'd think success like that would bring you peace, maybe even respect. But in my case, it earned me nothing but resentment from the very people I supported. And if you think karma's slow, wait until you hear this. So, before you get pulled in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually believe that betrayal always comes back around. And let me know where you're watching from. Ever had someone smile at you while holding a knife behind their back? Now sit back, let the room go quiet, and let me tell you how it really went down. It started like most things do, small. I was 26 when I met Rachel. She was stunning, intelligent, warm in that subtle way that made you lean in to hear her thoughts. We met at a tech conference in Denver. I was fresh off a series of funding round, high on hope and sleepless ambition. She was working in corporate comms for a fintech startup, and somehow, she found me fascinating. Our chemistry was immediate. 6 months later, we moved in together. A year later, we were married. Rachel came from a close-knit family. Her parents, especially her mom, Sandra, played a central role in her life. At first, they seemed sweet, inviting, the kind who baked cookies for neighbors and remembered your birthday. But beneath that soft tone was a razor-thin boundary. You either fit their mold, or you were gently, politely excluded. And from the start, I knew I didn't fit. I was a self-made man, the son of a mechanic and a grocery store clerk, a kid who got into coding on a second-hand laptop while working night shifts at a gas station. I wasn't Ivy League. I didn't speak with the polished tone of old money. Sandra never said it outright, but I saw it in her eyes when I talked about the servers I was optimizing or the markets I was disrupting. I was the project, the one Rachel could fix. At first, I tried harder. Holidays, I bought them gifts I knew they'd never afford for me. Sandra loved Baccarat glass, I tracked down vintage pieces. Her father liked golf, I got him a private tea time at Pebble Beach. No one ever said thank you. Still, I kept building. Over the next decade, my company grew. I reinvested everything. Long nights, lost weekends. I missed birthdays, vacations, anniversaries, not because I didn't care, but because I thought I was building a future for all of us. And to some degree, I was. We moved into a gated community. I paid off Rachel's student loans. When her sister Emily had a baby, I covered the medical bills that insurance wouldn't. When Sandra hinted that her kitchen was so outdated, I remodeled it top to bottom. Not once did I say, "This is my money." It was always ours. That's how I saw family. But the thing about generosity? It makes some people kinder and others more entitled. The first real crack came 3 years ago. I just closed a government contract that catapulted us into a new revenue tier. I wanted to celebrate. I booked out a private rooftop for dinner. Rachel, her family, my business partners. It was a perfect evening until Sandra leaned over, wine glass in hand, and said loud enough for everyone at the table, "It's so good that Rachel settled down with someone stable. When you first brought Roger around, I thought, this guy, with that old Honda and no real roots." She laughed, and so did Rachel's dad. My hands stayed on the table, my smile practiced. I'd heard versions of that before. But this time, it hit different. After dinner, Rachel apologized, sort of. "You know how Mom is," she said. "She means well." But she didn't push back. Not once. Over time, the comments became sharper. When Rachel's cousin lost her job, Sandra suggested I pull some strings, because apparently my 15 years of building a niche cybersecurity firm made me responsible for everyone else's failures. I let it go. Every insult tucked itself away in a drawer labeled, "Not worth the fight." But the drawer was getting full. Then came the day that made everything snap. We were at Sandra's house for brunch, one of those forced family traditions where everyone pretends the mimosas make them happier. I walked into the kitchen to find Rachel, her sister, and Sandra laughing about something. I waited, then asked what was so funny. Sandra turned to me, smile still intact, and said, "We were just joking that if you ever left, at least Rachel would have the house." My smile didn't crack. But something inside me did. The house was in my name. The mortgage had been paid in full by me. The land was part of a trust I'd created years earlier. I'd made every payment, signed every deal, secured every lien release. And now they were laughing about how easily they'd keep it. I nodded, walked back into the living room, and sat down. From that moment on, I knew something had to change. Not because of one comment, but because of what it represented. They didn't respect me. They tolerated me because I paid for everything. And once they thought I was done being useful, they were ready to discard me just like that. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I did something far more dangerous. I started paying attention. And planning. I began collecting details the way a jeweler might collect flaws in a diamond, quietly, methodically. I paid attention to every joke that wasn't quite a joke, every text message that left me out of group plans, every bank transfer Rachel made from our joint account without a word. It's easy to miss these things when you're in the thick of it, but once you shift perspective from participant to observer, it all becomes so sharp. Like static coming into perfect signal. Rachel had started working part-time again, marketing for a boutique interior design studio, and suddenly she was talking about her money. At first, I thought nothing of it. I supported her career, encouraged it even. But when I noticed a second checking account in her name, one I hadn't seen before, and when transfers started happening in round numbers, $2,000 here, $5,000 there, I knew this wasn't about independence. It was about insulation. She was preparing for a life that didn't involve me. One evening, I got home early from a client trip and found her in the living room with Sandra. They didn't hear me come in. They were laughing about something. Then Rachel said, "I just need him to sign the separation papers before Q2, or it gets messy with the holdings." My body didn't move, but my chest locked up. Sandra asked if I'd push back, and Rachel said, "No. He's smart, but he's tired. He won't fight." I stood there in the hallway, shoes still on, suitcase in hand, staring through the slight crack in the doorway. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just drifting apart. It wasn't emotional distance or growing differences. This was a plan. A deliberate, calculated exit strategy. And it was built on one crucial assumption, that I wouldn't see it coming. They didn't know I'd already been preparing. Over the years, I'd diversified. The company bore my name, but I held only 12% directly. The rest was scattered through LLCs, trusts, and silent partnerships. I'd paid for elite financial architecture not because I thought I'd need it, but because I never liked putting power in someone else's hands. That paranoia, the same one that made me a great entrepreneur, was now protecting me from becoming their financial casualty. I met with my lawyer the next day. No confrontation. Just questions. Could she force a sale of the house? No. It was in a holding company registered to my name only. Could she touch the business? Only the shares in her name, less than 1%, gifted during our first year of marriage as a gesture. We updated my estate plan. We locked down assets. We rewrote operating agreements. Everything she thought she was entitled to was now firewalled behind strategy and signatures. Then came the move that changed everything. Quietly, I cashed out a large portion of my equity $2.6 million. Not to flaunt. To reposition. I bought a property 2 cities over. A warehouse turned loft with glass walls and privacy. I didn't tell anyone. Not Rachel. Not my employees. Just a few people I trusted implicitly. The space became my war room. I outfitted it with servers, legal files, backups of backups. Every conversation she'd had about separating, every suspicious transfer, I documented. I hired a digital forensics team not because I suspected criminal activity, but because I knew the power of patterns. And sure enough, the numbers painted a picture. Rachel was funding a life I wasn't a part of. Weekend trips billed to her business card. Boutique purchases sent to an address I didn't recognize. I drove by once. A condo. Not in her name. But inside? A man I'd never met. I didn't react. I adjusted. That's the difference between revenge and rage. Rage is loud. Revenge is surgical. By now, Sandra had grown bolder. She started dropping by the office unannounced, talking to my assistants like she was the one signing checks. One afternoon, she told my operations manager, "You'll be reporting to Rachel soon. She has plans." The arrogance was stunning, but it made my job easier. The more confident they became, the sloppier they got. The final straw wasn't infidelity. It wasn't even betrayal. It was condescension. Sandra came to my house. I still called it mine even though Rachel had moved most of her clothes to the condo by then, and asked me, point blank, "Roger, don't take this the wrong way, but maybe it's time you moved on. Rachel's going to need space to grow without feeling like you're clinging to what was." I stared at her, hands folded calmly, and said, "You're right. Growth requires pruning." She smiled, completely missing the tone. A week later, I signed over temporary power of attorney for my less critical assets to a trustee me cousin, a CPA with a talent for discretion. Then I filed for separation. Quietly. No drama. Just a filing with all the relevant documentation, financial statements, recorded conversations, asset protection disclosures. The same day, I closed our joint accounts and sent Rachel a wire for $50,000, more than enough for her to transition, but just low enough to send a message, "I'm done paying to be mistreated." Rachel exploded. She called, texted, emailed. But I didn't respond. I built silence into the plan. At first, she threatened. Then she begged. Then Sandra stepped in an email that began with, "You ungrateful little parasite," and ended with veiled legal threats about what Rachel deserved. I forwarded it to my lawyer. That email, combined with the forensic reports, became Exhibit A in our legal strategy. But I wasn't finished yet. I'd seen too many men lose everything to pride or impulse. I wanted control not just of the money, but of the narrative. And soon I'd have it. They didn't know what was coming. They thought I was walking away quietly. But I was only walking backward to get a better view before I pulled the trigger. Every morning, I woke before the sun, not to work but to wait. I watched patterns. The way Rachel still used my last name on documents. The way Sandra handled herself at community fundraisers, speaking as if she held the reins of my empire. I didn't need to shout to reclaim what was mine. I needed to time the silence just right, let it press on their nerves like a held breath they didn't know they were holding. Rachel thought she'd beaten me to the punch. But by then, I'd already opened a new company completely unrelated to the old one, in a sector that had exploded in the last 5 years, AI-driven logistics. Quietly, I transferred a skeleton crew, me most loyal engineers and operational staff, and set the gears turning. My name wasn't on the door. It wasn't even on the papers. But every line of code, every product design, and every signed partnership bore my imprint. I gave the team one rule: stay silent until launch. Meanwhile, I let Rachel and Sandra enjoy their illusion. They rebranded the business we built together, called it Fresh Horizon Solutions, and hosted a champagne-soaked launch party in the same office where we'd once stayed up until 3 a.m. chasing client leads. I watched the photos go live on Instagram, Rachel posing with clients I had brought in, Sandra giving a smug little speech behind a microphone I once paid for. I sat back in my new office and smiled. Let them bask. It wouldn't last. Then came the quarterly investor report. The one I'd been waiting for. You see, in the flurry of their arrogance, they'd overlooked one inconvenient truth. I still owned voting rights through a shadow trust I'd set up years ago, created for succession purposes, but never activated. It gave me access to records, board meetings, and key reports. The Q1 report was damning. Revenue had dropped 17%. Clients were reevaluating partnerships. Morale was plummeting. Why? Because they were running the company with ego, not instinct. And worst of all, one of their biggest contracts, a logistics tech pilot with a government agency, had been abruptly cancelled. I knew why. Because that pilot had quietly been absorbed into my new company. I'd pitched it myself under a new name, new face, new front, but with the same fire. And the agency had jumped ship. No lawsuit. No fanfare. Just silence. Their entire operation was bleeding from the inside, and I never touched a single document. I simply offered the world a better solution. And they took it. By then, Rachel was spiraling. She tried rebranding again, changing the site, the tagline, the leadership message. But the core of the business had always been relationships. And I was the one who built those. Sandra, desperate, started shopping around for investors, which led her right into the lion's mouth because every investor she called had already been contacted by me. Not with anger. Not with threats. Just transparency. I invited them to coffee. I showed them the numbers. The trajectory. The future. I asked for nothing. I just let them see what was already unfolding. And one by one, they began to understand. They were backing the wrong horse. The beauty of revenge isn't in destruction. It's in displacement. Letting the world adjust around you until the people who cast you out realize the ground beneath them was never solid. Rachel emailed me one afternoon. Short. Bitter. You really think this makes you the bigger man? I never responded. Instead, I bought out the lease for their office, yes, the one I once signed for. Their contract had a buyback clause they didn't even know existed. Within 3 days, they were evicted. No warning. No explanation. Just a notice and a lockout. They showed up at the building, cameras in hand, Sandra screaming into the phone. But no one answered. The staff had already left. I'd offered them better jobs weeks before. Higher pay. More vision. Less drama. Rachel showed up at my new office 2 days later. Not as a wife. Not as an executive. Just a woman who realized she no longer had a chair at the table. She stood outside the glass, watching the team inside as they worked on something that once belonged to her orbit. I didn't invite her in. Later that evening, I received a handwritten letter. No email. No texts. Just ink and effort. She said she never saw it coming, that I'd changed. That maybe she misjudged me. And that, despite everything, she hoped I'd find peace. She signed it with her full name. No love, no apology. Just the echo of someone who'd realized too late that what she tried to break had rebuilt itself without her. I folded the letter once, placed it in a drawer I rarely opened, and poured myself a drink. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast to vengeance or victory. I just sat in the quiet and felt the weight shift. The moment when power doesn't roar but rests, still and certain, in your hands. If you had told me years ago that my most profound moment of clarity would arrive not in boardrooms or battles, but in the silence after revenge, I might have laughed. But silence, true silence, is deafening when you've spent years screaming inside. That week, after I took back what was mine without laying a finger on Rachel or Sandra, I stopped reacting. I became the stillness they couldn't predict. The media caught wind of it eventually. Disruptor rebuilds tech empire quietly, one headline read. They didn't mention names, but everyone in our circle knew. My investors stayed anonymous. My name was attached only through patents and back-end filings. I didn't need glory. I had control. Rachel moved out of the city 3 weeks later. I heard she took a job consulting for a boutique agency in Chicago. Smaller scale. Fewer risks. Sandra, on the other hand, doubled down. She tried launching a new tech firm aimed at ethical AI, except she didn't know enough to speak to the right audience and burned through funding in under 6 months. Last I heard, she was ghosting clients, dodging lawsuits, and begging for grace she'd never offered anyone else. As for me, I finally took a vacation. A real one. I flew to Norway, stayed in a remote cabin with only snow and silence around me. I didn't take calls. I didn't check emails. I watched the snow fall like ash from a past life, burying everything behind me. For the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel responsible for saving anyone but myself. But peace doesn't always stay quiet for long. A month later, I got a knock on my door. Not literally, figuratively. It came in the form of an offer. One of the investors from my old company wanted to meet, discreetly. He said he represented a group of people who had watched everything unfold and wanted to fund something new. Something global. They weren't just interested in the company I'd built. They wanted me to lead a venture that would transform the logistics industry entirely. Real-time adaptive networks, AI-integrated infrastructure, fully autonomous distribution models. I listened. I nodded. And I told him the truth. I was done chasing anyone. If they wanted to join, they'd follow my lead. My terms. He agreed. That's when I knew what I'd built was no longer about proving Rachel or Sandra wrong. It wasn't even about proving myself right. It was about rewriting the rules, so no one could ever decide my worth again. I brought in new partners. Not investors' partners. People who understood vision, grit, silence. We scaled quickly, but strategically. No billboards. No press releases. Just results. Within 8 months, we had outperformed every logistics company in our class. A Forbes writer tried to get a quote. I declined. The silence, again, was louder. That year, my daughter turned 10. She'd grown up watching me work late, bury pain for smiles. But now she watched me take her to school, sit through her music recitals, cook pancakes on Saturdays. She once asked me, "Dad, are you still famous?" I smiled and told her, "Famous people need strangers to know them. I only need you to know me." One night, we ran into Rachel. It wasn't planned. A gala for tech philanthropists, she was someone's guest. She froze when she saw me across the room. I didn't approach her. But she walked over. Polite. Measured. Said hello. I introduced her to my daughter. Rachel smiled too widely. Said something generic about how much she'd grown. My daughter looked at her, then at me, and said, "Is she someone you used to know?" I nodded. "Used to," I repeated. Later, Rachel sent a follow-up email. She wrote, "You were always the long game, weren't you?" I didn't answer. Because I wasn't playing a game. I had simply waited for everyone else to run out of moves. Around that time, Sandra's company finally collapsed. She posted a long-winded essay on LinkedIn something about being misunderstood, pushing too hard, not being supported by the right people. I read it once, closed the tab, and moved on. You see, revenge doesn't always feel like fire. Sometimes, it feels like water slow, shaping everything quietly, until the old cliffs you once screamed at crumble from the inside. And just like that, the final echo of their voices disappeared from my story. The invitation arrived in an envelope thicker than most apologies, embossed with gold foil lettering that screamed wealth louder than truth. Sandra's 65th birthday bash, lavish, curated, and painfully unaware of irony, was to be held at the Hilton downtown. She didn't know I had recently bought into the parent company through a silent acquisition. It wasn't petty, it was poetic. I RSVP'd under a pseudonym, not to stir drama, but because I knew my presence would say more in silence than 1,000 speeches ever could. The night of the event, I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, nothing flashy, just enough precision to blend into the elegance while quietly controlling it. My daughter, now 17, came with mature, steady eyes that didn't need introduction or permission. She knew what had happened. All of it. She wasn't looking for revenge either. She was there to watch the scales rebalance. The ballroom shimmered under soft chandeliers, and the air buzzed with the kind of artificial joy you only hear when people are pretending they haven't chosen sides. I watched from a table near the back, not tucked away, but just distant enough for perspective. Sandra floated from one group to another, laughing too brightly, speaking too quickly, the queen of a kingdom built on discarded loyalty. I saw familiar faces, investors I once secured, clients I introduced, colleagues who once benefited from my grind and now treated my name like a ghost story. But I wasn't here to haunt. I was here to close. The toast began as predictably as her speech. A glass of champagne raised high, she spoke of perseverance, of being a woman in business who had sacrificed it all. Her voice grew softer as she glanced over the crowd and then hesitated when her eyes met mine. She didn't acknowledge me by name. Didn't need to. Her hand twitched just slightly, the only crack in a carefully sculpted mask. Then came the final toast slot. The mic was passed. People murmured. That's when I stood. No introduction. No list. No announcement. Just presence. I walked through the tables slowly, each step deliberate. The crowd hushed as if instinctively aware something unscripted had entered the scene. I reached the podium, looked around, and began calmly. I wasn't planning to speak tonight. But standing here, seeing so many familiar faces, I think it's time someone else tells part of the story. No gasps. Just tension, dense, electric, waiting to be cut. I remember this company when it started in a garage. I remember sacrificing sleep, friendships, health. Not for applause, but because I believed in the mission. And I remember the moment loyalty became leverage. When trust turned into a contract to be terminated at convenience. I paused, letting the words linger like fog on glass. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim leather folder. Inside, copies of founding agreements, early-stage contracts, original IP registrations signed by me, dated, authenticated. I placed them on the podium with reverence, not revenge. These aren't about money. They're about memory. And what it costs to let others reframe the truth while you hold your breath, waiting. Sandra didn't move, but the color drained from her face. She knew what those documents meant. The ones she thought I'd lost. Or forgotten. Or destroyed. Ownership, I continued, isn't always a title. It's knowing when to let someone else pretend they're at the top while you quietly own the ground under their feet. I left the file there. Didn't wait for applause. I walked back to my table. My daughter took my hand without saying a word. Sandra didn't return to the mic. The next day, a grainy video clip shot from a guest's phone surfaced online. Within hours, it went viral. The headline read, "Mystery Man crashes CEO's birthday with legal bombshells." Comment sections exploded with theories. Most people had no idea who I was. And that was perfect. I never sought vindication through attention. But attention found me anyway. Sandra emailed the following Monday. Polite. Formal. Offering to talk through the past. To seek closure. I didn't answer. There was no dialogue left to salvage. And then, as if karma had gone digital, Rachel's name appeared in my inbox through a lawyer. Apparently, she'd heard the buzz and believed she was entitled to equity adjustments based on her historic involvement. My legal team responded before I even saw the letter. They attached her signed separation agreement, complete with clauses confirming full forfeiture of future claims. There would be no adjustment. Only clarity. It was stunning in a way. How people who had once watched me pack my things with silence now wanted pieces of a life I'd rebuilt on ashes they poured. But I wasn't angry. I was finished. I didn't send any more emails. I didn't make phone calls. I simply disappeared again into my life, into my freedom, into the chapter they'd never be invited to read. You'd think that after delivering a public gut punch like that, I'd feel triumphant. Vindicated. But the truth? I just felt quiet. It wasn't a high. It wasn't revenge-fueled adrenaline. It was the slow exhale after years of holding my breath. The silence I walked into after leaving that ballroom was the same silence I had been carving for myself for over a decade, a place where I didn't need anyone's permission to belong. My daughter, bless her maturity, didn't ask questions as we got in the car. She didn't need to. She had seen it all. And I think in her eyes, for the first time, she saw me not just as her dad, not just as the man who made the money that paid for everything, but as someone who chose peace instead of spectacle. The next few weeks were a wave I let crash without trying to surf. Investors emailed. 2 of them wanted to chat over coffee. A few others made veiled apologies or extended backhanded invitations for future ventures. They acted like I'd just taken a sabbatical, like they hadn't watched me be dismissed from my own table without a second thought. I answered none of them. My new venture was quiet, clean, lean. I had no partners. No one to betray me. No one to disappoint. Just product. Just value. Just a team I handpicked not for their pedigree, but for their principles. The headlines eventually faded. New scandals replaced old ones, and my name became another mystery in the business forums. Who was the guy at Sandra's party? What's he working on now? Why did he vanish? I didn't correct them. Sometimes the most powerful story is the one people are never allowed to fully understand. Meanwhile, Rachel had gone eerily silent after the legal pushback. No more demands. No more messages. I heard, through an old mutual acquaintance, that she was struggling to get her lifestyle back on track. She'd built her comfort on my sacrifices. And now that I'd withdrawn the quiet current that carried her, the illusion dried up. I wish I could say I felt joy in her downfall. But I didn't. Just distance. One afternoon, about 3 months after the party, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something told me to answer. The voice on the other end was my father-in-law. The one man in that entire family who had never raised his voice, who had always greeted me with respect, even when others didn't. He said, "I just wanted to say I saw what happened. And I'm sorry I didn't speak up years ago." That one sentence meant more than any headline. More than any lawsuit. More than money. It reminded me that justice isn't always delivered in grand gestures or public scenes. Sometimes it's a quiet apology from someone who finally sees you clearly. My daughter started college that fall. She got in on merit, not money. I could have bought her way in anywhere, but she wanted to prove something to herself. I saw myself inherently stronger, unshaken by approval, untouched by the hunger to be liked. She didn't need to be celebrated to be certain. We celebrated her move-in with just the two of us. A small dinner. No photos. No speeches. Just laughter, stories, and a promise that I'd never let anyone else rewrite our narrative again. I visited Sandra's company site one day out of curiosity. A new rebrand. A new mission statement. A lot of talk about inclusive leadership and ethical roots. It was almost funny. Like someone was trying to repaint the house after ignoring the mold for years. But I let it go. Let them keep their illusion. My piece didn't require their recognition. On the anniversary of the company's founding, ironically also the anniversary of my exit, I took a walk alone along the same street where the first pitch deck had been written. I stood at the corner cafe, the one where I'd stayed up all night fixing presentations while others slept. And I just stood there. No need to post about it. No need to mark it with anything. It was my private ritual. A closing chapter. I think a part of me had needed that final walk to understand I wasn't wrong to give them everything. I just forgot to save something for myself. And now? I live slower. I eat better. I sleep more. I read again. I listen more than I speak. And for the first time in 20 years, I don't feel like I'm behind. The world still spins. The industry still thrives. But my life is no longer dictated by boardrooms or balance sheets. It's written in quiet mornings and peaceful nights. In simple joy. In earned stillness. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was just done handing my worth to people who only saw value in control. And in that way, the revenge wasn't about rage or exposure. It was about reclaiming what they never saw coming. Funny thing about betrayal, it doesn't always announce itself with a bang. Sometimes, it's a slow, silent erosion. 1,000 little moments where people show you who they are and you choose not to see it. I spent years trading my peace for praise, my time for someone else's legacy, my silence for their comfort. And in the end, all it bought me was a 5-minute firing and a room full of polite strangers pretending they didn't see it coming. But here's the twist, I'm grateful. Because that moment, public and humiliating as it was, became the line in the sand. The one where I stopped being the man they could quietly dismiss. The one where I chose myself, not with vengeance, but with clarity. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to stop letting them rent space in my life for free. The money helped. Sure. But the real payoff was waking up each morning without dread. Without the weight of having to prove my worth to people who were never truly watching. So if you're listening to this right now and wondering if you're crazy for feeling overlooked, unappreciated, or quietly betrayed or not, and you don't need a grand spectacle to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes, all it takes is a quiet exit, followed by a life so full, it doesn't need their approval. That's what I found. Not revenge. Not applause. Just peace. And if you asked me, peace is louder than any mic drop.